Hey folks, welcome back to Penalty Box Woodshop. This week I'm going to show you how to make a serving board and a cutting board as a matching set. Now projects like this are great for yourself, but they also make for good gifts around the holidays, and they can be batched out and sold for an easy profit. So I'm going to walk you through each step and show you exactly how easy it is to make a matching set like this. All right, so I just grabbed some walnut, maple, and padauk directly off the shelf. I think it's gonna look nice together. These are some colors that go well. Some of it has been milled and some of it has not. So I need to finish up milling this walnut and get everything cut to rough size. So let's get started on that. Now that everything is milled down to almost final dimension, I'm going to cut this in half and make two boards, both of them approximately 12 inches wide by 15 to 16 inches long. And I think what I'm going to do is do one of them edge grain, one of them normal, make one of them a cutting board and the other one a serving board. So it's kind of a matching set with a little bit different patterns, but the same type of wood. Next, I'm going to go over to the miter saw, go ahead and cut these to rough length, and then over to the table saw and start ripping my boards down. I'll put the measurements to everything that I do down in the description section below, so you can go down there and check it out. All right, now all our pieces are cut and they're flipped up on the edge grain running this way. And I did my best to keep these in order so that you could still see the grain pattern a little bit. So now is the hardest part, just coming up with a pattern that looks good. All right, I think that looks good. I think with these two on there, it makes the maple portion a little too wide. So I think I'm gonna leave these off, and my dimensions are still good for a good cutting board. And I like that pattern a lot. So I think that's what I'm gonna go with. All right, now that we have a design set for the cutting board, I'm gonna cut the wood for the serving tray so that I can arrange it in the same manner. Now that all the wood is cut and laid out, you can kind of see what I had in mind here. The serving tray and the cutting board match, but they're also different. I like the orientation, I like the wood colors. I think it looks really good. So next up, we're gonna get these things glued up, and then after that dries, we will get them flattened and finished. Now that most of the glue is cleaned up on this, I have the right clamps on, flip it over, get the rest of the glue off as much as I can at least, and then glue up the serving board. I noticed there's some bending in the center of the board, so I'm going to add these cauls and hopefully it'll flatten it back up. If it doesn't, then I'll loosen these big clamps a little bit. See if maybe that brings it back down. I think that should do it. Oh yeah, it's much better. Cauls on each end, keep the board flat, everything's compressed in, and this thing is ready to dry for a little while. All right, after about 8 hours in the big clamps, I took the clamps off both the serving board and the cutting board, and I left them in the cauls overnight. The reason I left them overnight is because you really want the glue to have time to set up and dry before running it through your saw, planer, flattening it out with your router or whatever you're gonna do. So I'm gonna get the cauls off of here and then we're gonna move on to getting these things squared up and flattened. Okay, with our cutting board and serving board out of clamps and cauls, it's time to flatten them. With the cutting board, because the board's and the grain is aligned this way, I can use my planer sled and planer to flatten one side and then flip it over and run it back through to flatten the other side. With the serving board, the boards are arranged this way and I can't run it through my planer across grain. Now, I could use my sled and the drum sander, take light passes and the drum sander would handle that one side, but it's not too far off of flat already. So I think with a hand plane and a little bit of sanding, I can get this one pretty close. Next up, I'm just going to throw this little mini chamfer bit in my router and break the edges of all of the boards. Now for one of the most important parts about making a cutting board or a serving board, and that's before we sand them to final grit, we need to wet them down and raise the grain. That's going to prevent these from feeling rough later on when you wash them or when they get juices on them when you're cutting stuff. So I'm just going to use this regular old spray bottle with just some plain old water in it. I'm going to spray both the boards down, let the grain raise, and then I'm going to sand them to final grit. Now that our boards have had some time to dry a little bit, you can rub your hand across the board and feel that grain that it's been raised. Now we're going to take our final grit of 220 and give it the final sanding on all the sides and edges, and then we're ready to finish them. Okay, now that our boards are sanded to final grit and they're nice and smooth, we're gonna add these little handles to the serving board. They're just some door handles I picked up at the big box store, and it's gonna give it a serving board look, but also be easier to carry around. So just a quick couple screws and we're done with that. Now that our holes are pre-drilled in our serving board for the handles, it's time to apply our finish. I recommend either Walrus oil or a Howard's Butcher's Block conditioner. They're all natural oils. They're gonna look great on these cutting boards. So let's get it applied. After applying the oil, wait for about 24 hours and then just use a rag to wipe off any excess that might be still laying around. All right, folks, that does it for us today. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, leave all your questions down in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get to all of them. In the description section, I'll have an affiliate link to all the tools that I used during this video. I hope this was helpful, and I can't wait to see what you build. We'll see you next time.